Hi, I'm Tyler. Living with my dad and stepmom Janet, along with her two kids, was never easy. But in the beginning, things were at least tolerable. Dad remarried 2 years ago, and at first, Janet seemed fine, distant, but fair. However, it didn't take long for the differences in how she treated her kids and me to become glaringly obvious. It started small. At dinner, her kids would get generous servings, while I'd often be left with what felt like scraps. "Tyler, you're growing too fast. We need to watch your diet," Janet would say, forcing a strained smile. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she had a point. But as Dad started working longer hours, Janet's control over the household tightened, especially over me. One afternoon, I came home starving, dropped my backpack by the sofa, and headed for the kitchen. But Janet was already there, blocking the fridge. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked sharply. "Just grabbing a snack," I replied, trying to keep my tone calm. "I'm starving." Her response was dismissive, her eyes not even meeting mine. "Snacks are for the kids. They have swim practice. You can wait for dinner." As the days turned into weeks, a knot formed in my stomach, not just from hunger, but from the realization that this was my life now. My room became my only sanctuary from her icy stares and suffocating rules. But even there, I couldn't escape the growing sense of isolation. One rare evening, when Dad was home, I tried to talk to him. "Dad, things are different when you're not here. I don't think Janet likes me very much." He barely looked up from his work. "Tyler, Janet's doing her best. Just give it time. Things will get better." But they didn't. He couldn't see what I saw or hear the sharpness in her words. Feeling more alone than ever, I retreated back to my room, listening to the sound of their laughter echo down the hall. Lying on my bed, I wondered how long I could endure this. The hunger was no longer just physical. It gnawed at my heart too, for the warmth and love that had once filled our home before Janet arrived. Things took a darker turn when Janet installed locks on the fridge and pantry. It wasn't gradual. One morning, the kitchen was just off limits unless Janet said otherwise. "You need to earn your meals from now on," she announced, standing in front of the closed kitchen door. "I can't have you taking whatever you want. You'll do extra chores, mow the lawn, wash the cars, clean the garage, or you can give up your allowance." Her kids sat silently eating their breakfast as I stood there, unsure of how to even begin earning something as basic as food. That first week, I worked until I could barely stand. I mowed the lawn until my hands blistered, scrubbed the cars until they sparkled, and organized the garage so meticulously you could eat off the floor. But when I asked for food, Janet would just gesture toward a tiny plate, a meal so small, it hardly lasted me a few hours. I started hiding bits of food whenever I could, crackers, apples, anything that wouldn't spoil too quickly. I stashed it in my backpack, under my bed, inside old shoe boxes. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. My clothes started hanging off me, and I couldn't focus at school. My grades, once a source of pride, began slipping. "Tyler, are you okay?" My teacher, Mrs. Jensen, asked me after class one day when I flunked a test I should have aced. "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied, avoiding her gaze. I wasn't ready to admit how bad things had gotten, not even to myself. At home, every mealtime became a battleground. Janet's rules grew harsher, and my attempts to meet her demands became increasingly desperate. "You didn't finish washing the windows." "No dinner tonight," she announced one evening, her words slicing through the air. That night, lying in bed, my stomach ached, not just from hunger, but from the emotional weight of living in a home where I had to earn the right to eat. The loneliness was suffocating, my thoughts swirling in a storm of frustration and despair. Each morning, I woke up exhausted, dreading the day ahead. School offered no escape as my declining grades began to draw unwanted attention. "Tyler, you need to apply yourself more," a teacher commented one day, handing me back another test marked in red. But how could I explain that it wasn't a lack of interest, but a lack of food that was dragging my grades down? Every day felt heavier than the last, the weight of my situation pressing down on me until it felt unbearable. Janet's house no longer felt like a home, it was a prison. I found myself counting down the days until I could escape somehow. The weeks blurred into one long stretch of exhaustion and hunger, and then everything changed during what felt like the hardest week of my life. I was slumped over my desk in history class, trying to stay awake and focus, when Mrs. Jensen, my teacher, paused mid-sentence and walked over to me. Her sudden presence snapped me out of my daze. "Tyler, can you stay after class for a moment?" she asked softly, her voice filled with a concern I hadn't heard from anyone in a long time. When the bell rang, my classmates rushed out, but I stayed behind, dreading the conversation I knew was coming. "Tyler, I've noticed you've been really tired lately and your grades have dropped a lot. Is everything okay at home?" Mrs. Jensen's eyes searched mine, her tone gentle but serious. The concern in her voice broke down the wall I'd been holding up for so long. I tried to give her a simple excuse, something that would keep everything hidden. But the words felt hollow. "It's nothing. I just haven't been sleeping well." She sat down next to me, her expression becoming more serious. "Tyler, if something is going on, you can tell me. It's important." That's when everything came pouring out. I told her about the locks on the fridge and pantry, the rationed meals, the endless chores, and the way Janet treated me compared to her own kids. Mrs. Jensen listened to every word, her face growing more concerned with each detail. The very next day, Mrs. Jensen made a call to Child Protective Services, CPS. Within hours, a social worker arrived at school to speak with me. I shared my story again, showing them the faint bruises from the physical strain of the chores and the toll my malnourishment had taken on my body. CPS acted quickly. Later that day, while I was still at school, they paid a visit to my home. I heard about what happened after. Janet was caught completely off guard. Her usual calm, calculating demeanor gave way to defensive anger as she tried to brush off the accusations. "This is nonsense. He's just a lazy boy making up stories because he doesn't want to do his chores," she snapped at the social worker. But the evidence spoke louder than her words. The locks on the fridge and pantry, my near-empty bedroom with hidden stashes of food, and my appearance told a story that was hard to deny. When my dad was called home from work, he was shocked. At first, he couldn't believe it, but as the facts sank in, his disbelief turned to horror. "I had no idea," he whispered, his voice breaking as he looked at me, not just as his son, but as a victim of the woman he had trusted. The betrayal hit him hard. CPS facilitated a tense family meeting where everything was laid bare. Janet's actions, the evidence, and my struggles were out in the open. My dad was torn, devastated by the choice he now had to make between his wife and his son. But in the end, the truth was undeniable. He made the decision to remove Janet from our lives. Divorce proceedings began soon after, and Janet was forced to move out. My dad was overwhelmed with guilt and emotional turmoil, realizing how blind he had been to what was happening under his own roof. He was racked with guilt for not seeing the signs earlier, for letting his work blind him to the reality of our home life. We moved out of the house, taking temporary refuge in a small apartment while we navigated the legal and emotional fallout. One evening, as we sat in our new living room, much smaller and humbler than what we were used to, Dad turned to me, his eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Tyler. I should have been there for you. We'll get through this together." His words, though heavy with regret, held a promise. The hope of healing felt like a faint light at the end of a very dark tunnel. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. We were finally free from Janet's control, and though the road ahead was uncertain, it was one we would walk together. We started family therapy in the second week at our new place. The therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Ellis, had a gentle way of drawing out the words we had been too afraid to say. "It's about rebuilding trust," she told us during one session. "Trust in each other and in yourselves." In therapy, we unpacked everything. I talked about the hunger, the loneliness, and the desperation, while Dad shared his guilt and struggle to balance work with family. It was painful, revisiting those dark moments, but with each session, it felt like we were slowly mending something that had been broken for a long time. Gradually, life began to take on a new rhythm. I re-enrolled in school, and with regular meals and less stress, my health improved. My grades climbed back up, and my teachers noticed the change. Mrs. Jensen even stopped by one day with a stack of books she thought I'd enjoy. "Just a little fuel for that brilliant mind of yours," she said with a wink. Dad also made changes. He cut back his work hours to be more present at home. We started cooking together, stumbling through recipes and laughing at our kitchen disasters. In those little moments, I began to see the father I had missed during the hardest times. We also started a new tradition, Sunday walks in the park, just the two of us. Sometimes we walked in silence, sometimes we talked about everything and nothing. It was during one of those walks that Dad stopped, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Tyler, I know I can't change the past, but I promise you this, I will never let you go through anything like that again. We're in this together." It wasn't an instant fix. Some days were harder than others, and the shadows of the past would sometimes creep in, chilling the space between us. But we faced them together, a father and his son, rebuilding the bridges that had almost burned down. Looking ahead, I know there are still challenges to face and wounds to heal. But for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. I believe in the possibility of a future where the pain of the past is just a memory, a lesson learned on the path to becoming stronger. As I share this story, I hope it reaches someone who needs to hear it. You're not alone, and there's always a path to healing, no matter how broken the road might seem. Thanks for listening. If this touched you, or you know someone who might benefit from hearing it, please like and subscribe for more stories like this.